They don't fear your failure. They fear the moment you realize you were never meant to live in chains. Stay with me till the end. The last lessons will truly change your perspective. Look at your life for a moment, not what you show the world, but what you feel when you're alone. That quiet heaviness, that invisible pressure to become something you never consciously chose. You were told what success looks like. You were told how to behave, how to think, how to dream, and most dangerously what not to question, and slowly, without anyone forcing you, you accepted it. This talk is not about rebellion against the world. It's about liberation from the invisible prison inside your own mind. Because the truth is uncomfortable, but powerful. They don't want you free, not because you are weak, but because a free human being cannot be controlled. Now listen carefully. Every lesson builds on the next. If you skip the final ones, you will miss the heart of the transformation. The first prison was never built with iron or stone. It was built quietly, gently, invisibly, inside the mind. That is why most people never realize they are trapped. They wake up every day believing they are free, while their choices, fears, and dreams are already decided for them. Not by force, but by conditioning. From the moment you were born, you entered a world that had already made up its mind about who you should become. Before you spoke your first word, expectations surrounded you. Before you understood life, rules were handed to you. And none of this was done with cruelty, which is why it worked so well. It was done with smiles, rewards, praise, and approval. As a child, you were not taught how to be aware. You were taught how to behave. Sit quietly, don't question too much. Follow instructions, fit in. You learned very early that love was conditional, that when you pleased others, you were accepted. And when you didn't, something was taken away. Maybe affection, maybe safety, maybe belonging. Slowly a dangerous equation formed inside you. Obedience equals survival. So you adapted. Not because you were weak, but because you were human. A child will always choose belonging over truth, and that choice, repeated thousands of times, becomes a habit of the soul. This is how the invisible prison is formed. No one needed to lock you in. You began to police yourself. You started rejecting your own thoughts before anyone else could. You learned to silence your curiosity because it made others uncomfortable. You learned to doubt your inner voice because it didn't match the outer world. And over time, what was once alive and spontaneous became cautious and controlled. The tragedy is not that this happened. The tragedy is that it became normal. You grew up and called this prison reality. You called it being mature. You called it how life works. You stopped asking who decided these rules. You stopped wondering whether the life you were chasing was truly yours. You became busy enough to never sit with the uncomfortable question, am I living or am I being lived? And here is the most disturbing part. This prison feels safe. It offers predictability, approval, a sense of direction. But safety is not freedom, and predictability is not truth. The mind prefers the familiar, even if the familiar is suffocating. That is why people defend the very systems that limit them. That is why they mock those who step outside the pattern. Because when someone else breaks free, it threatens the illusion that the prison is necessary. Look closely at your own life. How many decisions were driven by fear of judgment rather than inner clarity? How many dreams were postponed because they didn't fit the acceptable script? How many times did you feel something was wrong, but convinced yourself to adjust instead of listening? This is not failure. This is conditioning working perfectly. The invisible prison doesn't shout. It whispers. It says, be realistic. It says, don't risk too much. It says, people like us don't do things like that. And because it sounds reasonable, you rarely challenge it. But awareness changes everything. The moment you observe a thought, instead of immediately believing it, a small crack appears in the wall. You begin to notice that many of your fears were taught, many of your limitations were inherited. Many of your beliefs were never examined, only absorbed. And this realization can be unsettling, because once you see the prison, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize conditioning, innocence is lost, but consciousness is born. This is why most people avoid silence, because in silence the walls become visible. In silence the question arises, if I remove everything I was told to be, who am I? And that question is terrifying to an unprepared mind. So people choose noise, distraction, endless activity, anything to avoid looking inward. But deep down the soul knows something essential is missing, something alive is waiting. If you feel that restlessness, that quiet dissatisfaction, that success cannot erase, understand this. It is not a flaw. It is the part of you that remembers freedom. Stay with this journey. The lessons ahead are even more powerful. And if you leave now, you will miss the moment where awareness turns into courage. Because the invisible prison survives only as long as you remain unconscious of it. The moment you see clearly, the door begins to open. Fear was never your enemy. It was the tool, and this is one of the hardest truths to accept, because it changes how you see your entire life. You were taught to fight fear, to overcome it, to escape it, but rarely were you taught to understand it. And what you don't understand, you remain controlled by. Fear is subtle. It doesn't always arrive as panic or terror. Most of the time, it appears as being practical. It whispers caution. It dresses itself as responsibility. It pretends to protect you. And because it sounds intelligent, you trust it. From a very young age, fear was introduced as guidance. Don't do that, you'll fail. Don't say that, people will judge you. Don't try this, it's risky. Slowly, fear became the invisible boundary of your life. Not because someone forced it on you, but because it seemed logical. And here is the uncomfortable truth: a fearful person is easy to manage. When fear runs your life, you don't need chains, you don't need threats. You limit yourself voluntarily. You shrink your dreams before anyone else can reject them. You settle, not because you want to, but because it feels safer than uncertainty. Fear teaches you to negotiate with life instead of living it. You start asking questions like, what if it doesn't work? Instead of, what if this is my calling? You measure your steps based on approval rather than truth. And slowly your life becomes a series of compromises you didn't even realize you were making. The most dangerous part is that fear becomes familiar, and familiarity feels like home. You wake up with anxiety and call it normal. You suppress your desires and call it maturity. You silence your inner voice and call it discipline. But discipline without awareness is just obedience in disguise. Fear doesn't stop you with force, it exhausts you with doubt. It keeps you busy overthinking, imagining worst-case scenarios, replaying past failures, anticipating future rejection. And while your mind is occupied, life passes by, opportunities fade, energy weakens, courage rusts, and then one day you look back and wonder how years disappeared so quietly. But here is the liberating realization: fear only survives in unconsciousness. The moment you bring awareness to fear, it begins to lose its grip. When you observe it, instead of obeying it, you notice something surprising. Fear is rarely about the present moment. It is almost always about imagination, about a future that hasn't happened or a past that no longer exists. Fear feeds on stories. Awareness brings you back to reality. When you sit with fear, instead of running from it, you begin to see its patterns. You recognize how it exaggerates consequences, how it underestimates your strength, how it assumes disaster before effort. And slowly, fear is exposed, not as a monster, but as a habit. This is where freedom begins to grow, not by eliminating fear, but by no longer letting it decide. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is clarity in the presence of fear. It is the ability to say, I see you, but you will not drive my life. And that clarity comes only through awareness. Most people never reach this point because they mistake fear for wisdom. They confuse comfort with truth. They build entire lives around avoiding discomfort and then wonder why they feel empty. But you are not meant to live small. You are not meant to spend your life, man, aging anxiety instead of exploring potential. Fear was meant to be a signal, not a ruler. And when you stop obeying fear blindly, something powerful happens. Energy returns. Decisions become simpler. You start acting from inner alignment rather than external pressure. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, it means life becomes real. And remember this, those who benefit from your fear will always encourage it. They will call you irresponsible for choosing your own path. They will call you unrealistic for trusting your inner voice. Because a fearless, aware human being cannot be predicted, controlled, or easily influenced.
Stay with this journey.
If you think this lesson is important, wait until the next one, because it reveals how fear is kept alive every single day without you even noticing. And once you see that, you will never look at your habits the same way again. The world does not silence you by force anymore. It overwhelms you. Noise has replaced chains. Distraction has replaced control. And this is far more effective because a distracted mind never realizes it is imprisoned. Look at your day. From the moment you wake up, your attention is pulled in 100 directions. Notifications, news, opinions, entertainment, urgency. You rarely experience a single moment untouched by input. And slowly, without noticing, your inner voice grows faint. This is not accidental. A distracted human being does not ask dangerous questions. They don't pause long enough to feel dissatisfaction. They don't sit with discomfort long enough for awareness to arise. Distraction keeps you busy, and busyness keeps you asleep. You call it staying informed, staying connected, staying productive. But productivity without presence is just movement without meaning. You are doing more, yet feeling less, consuming more, yet understanding less, surrounded by noise, yet strangely empty. The mind was never designed for constant stimulation. It was designed for clarity. But clarity requires silence. And silence is exactly what modern life avoids. Because in silence, you start noticing patterns. You begin to see how repetitive your thoughts are, how automatic your reactions have become. You realize how many of your desires were planted, how many of your fears were amplified. And that realization is dangerous to any system built on unconscious participation. So, distraction is offered as comfort. Whenever anxiety appears, you scroll. Whenever boredom arises, you consume. Whenever sadness knocks, you distract. And slowly you lose the ability to sit with yourself. This is why many people fear being alone, not because loneliness is painful, but because solitude removes distraction. And without distraction, You are left with your own mind. And if your mind has never been understood, that meeting feels unbearable. Distraction numbs discomfort, but it also numbs insight. You may feel entertained, but you are not fulfilled. You may feel busy, but you are not alive. You may feel owned, but you are not wise. Because wisdom requires digestion, not constant intake. Notice how rarely you complete a thought without interruption, how quickly your attention jumps, how uncomfortable stillness feels. This restlessness is not natural, it is conditioned. And here's the deeper truth: distraction keeps fear alive. When you never slow down, fear remains vague and powerful, unexamined. It lingers in the background, shaping your choices quietly. But when you stop, when you breathe, when you observe, fear begins to dissolve into understanding. This is why awareness feels like resistance at first. The moment you turn off the noise, suppressed emotions surface, unanswered questions rise, inner conflicts become visible. And many people mistake this discomfort as failure, when in truth it is healing. Silence is not empty, it is revealing, and courage to stay with that revelation is rare. Most people would rather drown themselves in distraction than confront their own conditioning. They would rather stay busy than become conscious, because consciousness demands responsibility, and responsibility feels heavy to an unprepared mind. But once you taste even a moment of clarity, something shifts. You realize how much of your life was lived on autopilot. You see how easily attention was hijacked. You recognize how external noise replaced inner guidance. And from that moment, distraction loses its power. You don't need to escape the world. You need to reclaim your arte Ninshian, because attention is life. What you give your attention to, you become. A distracted life is not stolen all at once. It is given away in small, unnoticed moments. But awareness returns it instantly. This is why those who benefit from your unconsciousness encourage constant stimulation. They fear your stillness more than your rebellion, because a silent, aware human being cannot be manipulated easily. Stay with this path. The next lesson reveals something even more confronting: how obedience was dressed up as virtue, and why questioning feels uncomfortable to so many. If you think this point is powerful, do not leave now. What comes next changes how you see being good forever. Most people believe they are moral. They believe they are good. They believe they are doing the right thing. And yet, very few have ever asked themselves a dangerous question: who decided what right means? This is where obedience hides, not as force, but as virtue. From early on, you were praised for compliance. You were told that being good meant agreeing, not questioning. Being respectful meant staying silent. Being responsible meant following the path already laid out. And slowly, obedience was dressed up as morality. You were never told, obey. You were told, this is how good people behave. So when a rule didn't feel right, you doubted yourself instead of the rule. When a system felt unjust, you questioned your sensitivity instead of its structure. When your inner truth conflicted with external expectations, you called it selfishness. This is how conscience gets replaced by conditioning. A conditioned mind does not act from awareness. It reacts from habit. It follows patterns without understanding them. It repeats values without examining whether they are alive or outdated. And because everyone around is doing the same, it feels normal, comfortable, safe. But comfort is not truth. Real morality is not borrowed, it is lived. It arises from awareness, not instruction. A conscious human being does not ask, "Is this allowed?" They ask, "Is this true?" They do not obey blindly. They respond responsibly. And this is deeply threatening to any structure built on control, because an obedient person can be predicted. A conscious person cannot. This is why questioning is subtly discouraged. Not openly, but emotionally. Questioners are labeled difficult, rebellious, immature. They are told to wait, to adjust, to trust the system. And slowly, curiosity is replaced with caution. But notice something important. Every major shift in human consciousness came from those who refused to obey blindly. Not because they wanted chaos, but because they wanted truth. Obedience feels safe because it removes responsibility. If you follow orders, you don't have to face the consequences inwardly. You can say, "I was just doing what I was told," and the ego relaxes, but awareness removes that escape. When you see clearly, you can no longer hide behind rules. You must choose. And choice is frightening to those who have lived their entire lives on autopilot. This is why many prefer moral rules to moral intelligence. Rules are easy. They require no presence, no sensitivity, no inner listening. But intelligence demands awareness in every moment. It asks you to feel the situation, understand the context, and act consciously, even when there is no clear guideline, and that is exhausting to an unconscious mind. So obedience is praised. It keeps order, it keeps predictability, it keeps systems running, but it also keeps souls asleep. Look at how often people defend traditions they've never examined, how fiercely they protect beliefs they didn't discover themselves, how emotionally they react when those beliefs are questioned. This reaction is not intelligence, it is fear. Fear of losing certainty, because once you stop obeying externally, you must start listening internally, and that inner voice has been ignored for a long time. True goodness is not about following commands. It is about being aware of impact. True compassion is not rule-based, it is responsive. It changes with understanding, it evolves with consciousness. A conscious person may break a rule, but never their awareness. An obedient person may follow every rule and still cause harm. This is the paradox few are willing to face. And here's the deepest layer. Obedience trains you to distrust yourself. It teaches you that authority knows better than your own experience. That answers come from, outside. That guidance must be borrowed. So when the time comes to live authentically, you hesitate. You look for permission. You wait for approval that never arrives. Freedom begins the moment you realize that morality without awareness is just control with good branding. But awareness alone is not enough, because seeing clearly is only the beginning. Acting on what you see requires something far more difficult: courage. And that is where the next lesson takes us. Stay with this. If you think this shook something inside you, do not leave now. The next step is where most people turn back, and where true freedom is decided. Freedom is often romanticized, but rarely understood. People imagine freedom as escape from rules, from responsibility, from structure. But that idea itself is a trap, because real freedom is not light. It is heavy, and that is why so few are willing to carry it. The moment you begin to awaken, something uncomfortable happens. You can no longer blame easily. You can no longer point fingers at parents, society, systems, or circumstances with the same innocence. Awareness removes your favorite hiding place. Excuses. Freedom means this: your life is yours, not partially, not symbolically, completely. And that realization can feel terrifying. Because if your life is truly yours, then so are your choices. And if your choices are yours, then so are the consequences. There is no one left to hold responsible. This is why many people unconsciously choose imprisonment. A prison, whether external or internal, provides relief. It gives you someone to blame, something to resist, someone else to decide. Responsibility is outsourced, but freedom gives you no such comfort. When you see clearly, you realize that even your inaction is a choice. Even your silence is participation. Even your waiting is a decision. And suddenly, the weight of life is no longer abstract. It is personal. This is where many retreat. They taste awareness, but when responsibility arrives, they step back into familiar patterns. They say freedom is overrated. They say structure is necessary. They say it's better to be realistic. But beneath those words is fear. Fear of standing alone with one's own life. Because freedom does not ask, what should I do? It asks, what will you do? And there is no universal answer. Responsibility requires presence. It demands that you listen deeply, moment by moment, and respond consciously. There are no fixed formulas, no borrowed maps. What was right yesterday may not be right today. What works for others may not work for you. This uncertainty is unsettling to the conditioned mind. The conditioned mind wants clear instructions, a checklist, a path already approved. But freedom offers none of that. It offers awareness and expects you to walk. And here is the paradox. The more responsibility you avoid, the more controlled you become. The more responsibility you accept, the freer you feel. Because when you stop blaming inarg, why returns? When you stop waiting for rescue, clarity sharpens. When you stop expecting permission, courage emerges. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes honest. You stop lying to yourself about why you stay in situations that drain you. You stop pretending you don't know what needs to change. You stop hiding behind busyness, obligation, or fear. And yes, this level of honesty can be painful. You may realize that you stayed too long in comfort, that you compromised too often, that you ignored your intuition more than once. But responsibility is not about guilt. It is about ownership. Guilt looks backward and weakens you. Responsibility looks forward and empowers you. A responsible person does not punish themselves for the past. They learn from it. They do not complain about circumstances endlessly. They respond creatively. They don't wait for motivation. They act from clarity. This is why freedom and discipline are not opposites. Discipline chosen consciously is freedom in action. It is the ability to say no to what distracts you, so you can say yes to what matters. But discipline imposed externally feels like imprisonment. Discipline chosen internally feels like alignment. Most people never experience this difference. They rebel against structure or submit to it, but rarely transcend it. Freedom is that transcendence, and understand this clearly. No system benefits from responsible individuals. Systems benefit from dependence, from people who wait, complain, blame, and obey. A responsible human being does not need to be controlled. They govern themselves. This is why responsibility is rarely celebrated. It doesn't make good slogans. It doesn't feel glamorous. It feels demanding. But it is the doorway to dignity if you are willing to accept that your life is your responsibility. Not as a burden, but as a privilege. Something powerful shifts. You stop reacting, you start creating, you stop surviving, you start living. Stay with this journey. The next lesson reveals the cost of this freedom and why many who awaken feel a deep, unexpected loneliness. If you miss it, you will misunderstand your own transformation. When you begin to live consciously, something strange happens. You don't change your face, your name, or your language, yet you no longer fully belong where you once felt at home. Conversations feel shallow, old jokes don't land the same, familiar ambitions feel oddly empty, and you start to sense a distance growing between you and the world you used to know. This is not arrogance, this is awakening. Awareness separates before it connects. And this separation often feels like loneliness. Most people fear loneliness because they confuse it with emptiness. But loneliness in this context is not a lack, it is a transition. It is the space created when old identities fall away and new clarity has not yet found its voice. You are no longer asleep enough to blend in, but not yet established enough to feel ground. So you stand in between. This is the price of awakening, and it cannot be avoided. When you stop chasing validation, fewer people clap. When you stop repeating borrowed opinions, fewer people agree. When you stop pretending, fewer people recognize you. And for the first time, you meet yourself without the noise of belonging. That meeting can be uncomfortable. You may question whether you're going in the wrong direction. You may feel misunderstood. You may wonder if awareness was a mistake. And this is where many turn back, not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear isolation. Belonging is a powerful drug. Human beings would rather be wrong together than alone in truth. And society is built on this fact. Shared illusions create communities. Shared fears create bonds. Shared conditioning creates identity. But consciousness dissolves shared illusions. And when illusions dissolve, connection must be rebuilt on something deeper. Truth. Loneliness is not punishment. It is purification. It strips away relationships that were sustained by habit rather than authenticity. It reveals which connections were based on convenience rather than consciousness. And while this can feel painful, it is also liberating. Because for the first time, you are no longer performing to be accepted. You are simply being. And in that being, something sacred happens. You develop an inner companionship. You learn to sit with yourself without distraction. You listen, you observe. You begin to trust your own presence. This is not isolation. This is intimacy with existence. Most people never experience this because they fill every quiet moment with noise. They avoid solitude because it forces self-confrontation. But the conscious individual learns something rare, how to be alone without being lonely. This inner grounding becomes your anchor, and from that anchor, real connection becomes possible. Not based on roles, masks, or expectations, but on awareness. Conscious people recognize each other not by similarity, but by depth. But this recognition comes later. First, there is the desert, a space where old maps don't work, where old identities feel hollow, where external validation loses meaning. And in this space, you either mature or retreat. The retreat looks tempting. Familiar faces, familiar beliefs, familiar comfort. But something inside you now knows you can't unsee what you've seen. Once awareness dawns, unconscious belonging feels suffocating. Loneliness then becomes a teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches inner strength. It teaches you to stop leaning emotionally on others for stability. And this independence is not coldness, it is freedom. A conscious person does not use relationships to escape themselves. They share from fullness, not from need. And here's the quiet truth. Loneliness fades when you stop resisting it. When you accept it as part of the transformation, it softens. It becomes stillness, it becomes clarity, it becomes space. And in that space, something remarkable grows. Authenticity. You no longer chase connection. You attract it naturally, effortlessly, honestly. But before that happens, you must pass through this stage. Stay with it. Because the final lesson is not about struggle or fear or loneliness. It is about the sacredness of a free mind, and why reclaiming it is the most powerful act you will ever commit. If you leave now, you will miss the culmination of everything you've been building toward. A free mind is not loud. It does not seek attention. It does not need approval. It moves quietly, but its impact is undeniable. And this is why it is feared more than rebellion, more than anger, more than noise. Because a free mind cannot be controlled. They don't want you free, not because freedom is dangerous, but because it is unmanageable. A free mind does not consume fear as truth. It does not obey out of habit. It does not follow crowds blindly. It sees clearly, chooses consciously, and acts responsibly. And such a mind cannot be predicted, manipulated, or sold illusions. This is why freedom is rarely encouraged openly. It doesn't benefit systems built on dependence. It doesn't serve economies driven by dissatisfaction. It doesn't fit narratives that require you to feel incomplete, guilty, or afraid. A free mind is complete in itself, and that completeness is revolutionary. When your mind is free, you no longer need constant reassurance. You are not easily offended because your identity is not fragile. You are not desperate for validation because you are anchored within. You don't outsource your worth to opinions, achievements, or applause. You live from clarity, not comparison. This doesn't mean you withdraw from the world. On the contrary, you engage more deeply, but you engage without losing yourself. You participate without becoming possessed. You contribute without being consumed. A free mind can work, love, create, and lead without becoming enslaved by any of it. And here is the sacred part. Freedom is not selfish, it is responsible. A free person does not act unconsciously. They understand the impact of their words, choices, and presence. They are not driven by impulse nor paralyzed by fear. They move with awareness, and awareness naturally brings compassion, because when you are free from your own inner chaos, you stop projecting it onto others. This is why a free mind is a blessing to the world. It does not spread hatred. It does not fuel division. It does not amplify ignorance. It brings clarity wherever it stands. But freedom comes with a price, eternal vigilance. Because conditioning does not disappear forever. It waits. It tries to return through comfort, distraction, and old habits. A free mind must remain alert, present, alive. Freedom is not a destination, it is a practice. Each day you choose awareness over autopilot. Each day you choose responsibility over blame. Each day you choose truth over convenience. And in these choices, Freedom is renewed. This is why the journey you've walked through these lessons matters. You didn't just hear ideas, you peeled away layers, conditioning, fear, distraction, obedience, irresponsibility, loneliness, until only awareness remained. And now the question is simple but profound. What will you do with this freedom? Will you live consciously, or will you trade clarity for comfort again? Will you trust your inner truth, or will you return to borrowed beliefs? Will you act with courage, or retreat into familiar patterns? No one can answer this for you, and that is the beauty of it. Freedom does not demand perfection. It demands presence. It does not ask you to be fearless. It asks you to be aware. It does not promise comfort. It offers dignity. And remember this timeless truth: the quality of your life is determined by the depth of your awareness and the courage to act on it. Live consciously, live responsibly, live free, because once a mind awakens, no power on earth can enslave it again. And now pause for a moment, not to analyze, not to judge, just to feel what you've heard. Because this was never about ideas, it was about remembrance. You were never meant to live half awake. You were never meant to spend your life seeking mission. You were never meant to shrink your truth so others could stay comfortable. The world doesn't need more obedient people. It needs conscious ones. Freedom is not something you demand from outside. It is something you embody within. The moment you stop betraying your inner knowing, life begins to align. The moment you stop living from fear, clarity replaces confusion. The moment you stop outsourcing your worth, peace replaces anxiety. Bar. This is not an easy path, but it is a real one. And here is the final truth, the one worth carrying into every day of your life. But you don't become free by changing the world. You become free by changing the way you see. But when awareness leads, fear follows. .br. When responsibility rises, excuses fall. When consciousness awakens, chains dissolve. .dr. So walk gently, but walk truthfully. .br. Speak less, but speak honestly. Move slowly, but move consciously. .dr. Because happiness is not about having everything. It is about mastering your inner world and being grateful for what already is. Put awareness first, and fear will take the last place, but live consciously, and success will follow naturally. Choose truth even when it costs comfort. And remember, but the quality of your life will always reflect the depth of your awareness. BR, the courage you have to live by it. This is your life, but DR, live it awake. Not because the words have ended, but because something inside you has begun to stir. This moment is not about agreement. It is not about belief. It is not about inspiration that fades when the video ends. This moment is about recognition, a quiet memory, as if something ancient inside you is nodding softly, saying, "Yes, this is what I always knew but forgot." But you were never broken, but were never incomplete. You were never meant to be fixed. You were conditioned. And conditioning is not a crime, it is a circumstance. But remaining unconscious of it is a choice. And today, that choice stands clearly before you. Look honestly at your life, not with judgment, but with awareness. Notice how much energy you spend becoming acceptable. Notice how often you silence your truth to maintain comfort. Notice how many times you choose familiarity over aliveness. This is not weakness, this is training. You were trained to fit in, not to see clearly. You were trained to obey, not to understand. You are trained to succeed, not to awaken. And yet, despite all of that, something within you survived untouched. That silent witness, that subtle unease when life feels scripted, that quiet joy when you act from truth, even briefly. That is not imagination, that is freedom knocking. Freedom does not arrive like a storm, it arrives like clarity. Soft, undeniable, irreversible. The moment you see, truly see, that much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from unconscious living, the game changes. You stop fighting shadows. You stop blaming circumstances. You stop waiting for permission. And this is where responsibility becomes sacred. Responsibility is not guilt. It is not a burden. It is not pressure. Responsibility is ownership of awareness. It is the courage to say, this is my life, and how I live it matters. Most people never reach this point, not because they are in kappa, blur, but because they are distracted. They are numbed by routine, sedated by entertainment, pacified by borrowed beliefs. They live busy lives but not conscious ones. And busyness is the most socially acceptable form of sleep. Awakening, on the other hand, is inconvenient. It does not fit neatly into schedules. It disrupts identities. It questions goals you once chased blindly. It forces you to confront a terrifying question: if I stop pretending, who am I really? That question shakes the foundation of everything you were taught to be proud of. Your achievements, your titles, your social masks, your carefully curated identity. And for a while you may feel lost. This is natural. When the false falls away, the real needs time to breathe. Do not rush this phase. Do not try to replace one identity with another. Do not seek a new label called spiritual or enlightened. That too would be another prison. Just observe. Observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. Observe your emotions without suppressing them. Observe your reactions without justifying them. This observation is not passive. It is revolutionary, because when you observe, you are no longer possessed. And possession, by fear, by anger, by ambition, by validation, is the root of slavery. A free mind is not one that has no thoughts. It is one that is not owned by them. A free mind does not eliminate desire. It understands desire. A free mind does not reject society. It refuses to be hypnotized by it. And this is why a free mind is dangerous, not violent but uncontrollable. You cannot sell fear to someone who understands fear. You cannot manipulate guilt in someone who sees through guilt. You cannot dominate someone who is at home within themselves. This is why freedom has always been rare, not because it is inaccessible, but because it demands awareness every single day. Freedom is not a one-time awakening. It is a daily discipline of consciousness. Each morning you choose whether to live deliberately or mechanically. Each interaction you choose whether to respond consciously or react habitually. Each decision you choose whether to listen inwardly or obey externally. And yes, you will stumble, you will forget, you will fall back into old patterns. This is not failure, this is practice. Awareness is not about perfection, it is about returning to presence, returning to honesty, returning to inner alignment, and slowly something profound changes. You stop chasing happiness, and peace begins to arise naturally. You stop demanding meaning, and meaning reveals itself in simple moments. You stop trying to control life, and life starts cooperating, not because the world changed, but because you did. A conscious person does not need life to be perfect to feel whole. They meet imperfection with understanding. They meet uncertainty with curiosity. They meet pain with presence. This is inner strength, not the loud, aggressive kind, but the quiet, unshakable Ind. The kind that doesn't collapse when plans fail. The kind that doesn't harden when relationships end. The kind that doesn't panic when the future is unclear. Because clarity is no longer dependent on outcomes. This is maturity of consciousness. And from this maturity, a new way of living emerges. You work, but you are not consumed by work. You love, but you do not cling. You succeed, but you do not lose yourself in success. You fail, but you do not lose dignity. You participate fully, yet remain inwardly free. This balance is rare, and it is priceless. The world will try to pull you back into unconsciousness through urgency, through comparison, through fear disguised as responsibility, through comfort disguised as wisdom. Be gentle, but remain alert. Freedom is not fragile. but it is subtle. Neglect it and it fades. Honor it and it deepens. And now, the most important truth: no one can walk this path for you. Teachers can point, words can inspire, experiences can awaken. But living consciously is an intimate, personal commitment. It happens in the quiet moments, in choices no one sees, in honesty no one applauds. And that is why it matters, because the world does not change through noise alone. It changes through individuals who live awake, not preachers, not followers, but conscious human beings. If you live consciously, you become a mirror. Your presence alone challenges unconsciousness. Not by argument, but by contrast, not by force, but by authenticity. This is the highest form of contribution. And so, as you move forward, remember this: you are not here to impress, you are not here to conform, you are not here to live someone else's idea of success. You are here to experience life fully, awake, responsible, and aware. And if fear arises, let it arise, watch it, learn from it. But do not let it rule. If loneliness appears, sit with it. It is not emptiness. It is space preparing you for deeper connection. If confusion comes, do not rush to escape it. Clarity often follows stillness. And if doubt whispers, smile gently. Doubt is only the mind adjusting to freedom. Finally, carry this with you, not as a belief, but as a lived truth. Happiness is not about having everything. It is about being present with what is. Success is not about reaching the top. It is about not losing yourself on the way. And freedom is not the absence of structure. It is the presence of awareness. Live consciously, act responsibly, love deeply, without attachment, work passionately, without enslavement, because the quality of your life will never be determined by circumstances. It will always be determined by the depth of your awareness and the courage you have to live by it. This is your life. Do not live it asleep. What you are hearing is not meant to motivate you for a moment. It is meant to unsettle you gently, to loosen something rigid inside, to remind you of a truth that does not shout but patiently waits. Most people spend their lives trying to become someone. Very few ask whether the person they are becoming is truly alive. From the outside, everything may look fine: progress, movement, achievement, plans, ambition. But inwardly there is often a quiet exhaustion, not from effort but from pretending. Pretending to be certain when you are confused, pretending to be strong when you are disconnected, pretending to be satisfied when something essential feels unfulfilled. This exhaustion is not a personal failure. It is the cost of living unconsciously. You were not taught how to be aware. You were taught how to fit in. You were not shown how to listen inwardly. You were trained to adjust outwardly, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, your attention was pulled away from your own experience and handed over to expectations, timelines, comparisons, and borrowed definitions of success. At first, this felt normal, even exciting, because approval feels like nourishment to an uncentered mind. But approval never satisfies for long. It fades quickly, demanding more effort, more performance, more compromise. And somewhere along the way, many people lose touch with a simple question: is this life I'm living actually mine? This question is dangerous, not because it destroys life, but because it destroys illusions. And illusions are comfortable. Illusions protect us from uncertainty. Illusions offer ready-made identities. Illusions tell us who to be, what to want, and when to feel successful. Awareness removes that comfort. Awareness does not tell you what to do. It reveals what you've been doing unconsciously. And that revelation can feel like standing naked before yourself, without stories, without excuses, without borrowed meaning. This is where many turn away. Not because awareness is painful, but because it is honest. Honesty demands courage, not dramatic courage, but quiet, everyday courage. The courage to admit when something is empty, the courage to say no to what drains you, even when it is socially rewarded, the courage to pause when the world tells you to rush. A conscious life is not built overnight. It is built moment by moment through attention. Attention is your most precious resource. Not time, not money. Attention. Where your attention goes, your life follows. And yet, look at how casually attention is given away. To screens, to noise, to opinions, to endless stimulation. This constant outward pull leaves little space for inner clarity. And without clarity, people confuse movement with direction. They stay busy but not present, informed but not wise, connected but not intimate with themselves. This is not accidental. A distracted mind is easy to guide. A fearful mind is easy to manage. An unconscious mind does not resist, it adapts. But something extraordinary happens when attention returns inward. Not in a mystical sense, in a very human sense. You begin to notice how repetitive your thoughts are, how predictable your reactions have become, how many decisions are doctored, even by habit rather than insight. And for the first time, you see that much of what you call personality is actually conditioning. This realization can feel destabilizing. If I am not my thoughts, if I am not my fears, if I am not my roles, then who am I? Do not rush to answer this. This question is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be lived. The moment you stop trying to define yourself, space opens. And in that space, something more authentic begins to breathe. Not an identity, but a presence. A groundedness that does not need constant confirmation. This presence changes how you relate to everything. You still work, but work no longer defines your worth. You still strive, but striving is no longer desperate. You still desire, but desire no longer controls you. You begin to move through life with a different quality. Less reactive, more responsive. Less anxious, more attentive. Less performative, more sincere. This shift is subtle but profound. And here is where responsibility enters. Not as pressure, but as dignity. When you live unconsciously, responsibility feels heavy. It feels like blame, like burden, like obligation. But when you live consciously, responsibility feels empowering. It means you are no longer a victim of patterns you never chose to examine. You realize that even small choices shape your inner world. What you consume mentally, how you speak to yourself, where you place your energy, what you tolerate, what you avoid. Responsibility is simply a willingness to see clearly and act accordingly. No drama, no guilt, no self-punishment, just clarity followed by action. And this clarity will challenge many things you once accepted without question. Beliefs inherited but never tested. Values repeated but never embodied. Definitions of success that looked impressive but felt hollow. This is why awakening can feel lonely. When your inner landscape changes, your outer world does not immediately adjust. Old conversations feel misaligned. Old ambitions lose their shine. Old identities no longer fit. You may feel like you are standing on unfamiliar ground, not belonging fully to the past, not yet settled into the future. This in-between state is uncomfortable, but It is also sacred because it is here that authenticity is formed. Loneliness in this context is not abandonment. It is space, space for clarity, space for recalibration, space for truth to take root without interference. If you rush to fill this space, you miss its gift. Sit with it. Notice how much of your previous connection was based on agreement rather than understanding, on habit rather than presence, on fear of being alone rather than genuine intimacy. As awareness deepens, connection becomes more selective, not because you judge others, but because you no longer abandon yourself to be accepted. And slowly, quietly, a different kind of connection begins to appear. Less frequent, more real, less noisy, more nourishing. This is the difference between belonging in G and alignment. Belonging asks you to fit, alignment allows you to be, and from alignment, freedom matures. Freedom is not rebellion. Rebellion is still reactive. Freedom is clarity without resistance. It does not fight the world. It understands it and refuses to be hypnotized by it. A free mind is not anti-structure. It simply refuses unconscious structure. It uses systems without being owned by them. It respects order without surrendering awareness. This balance is rare. Most people swing between obedience and rebellion, never realizing that both are responses to external authority. Freedom is internal authority, guided by awareness, tempered by responsibility. And this internal authority does not shout. It does not dominate. It does not seek control. It listens. It listens to reality as it is, not as it should be. It listens to the body, the emotions, the moment. And from this listening, action arises naturally. This is not passivity, it is precision. A conscious action may look ordinary on the surface, but its quality is different. It carries presence, it carries intention, it carries integrity, and integrity is magnetic. You do not need to convince when you live in alignment. You do not need to prove when you are rooted. You do not need to chase when you are clear. This is why a free mind unsettles the unconscious. Not by argument, but by example. It exposes illusion simply by not participating in it. This is also why freedom requires vigilance, not paranoia, prayers. Hence, old patterns do not disappear permanently. They wait. They return disguised as comfort, as urgency, as just this once. As rational compromise, awareness must be renewed daily, not forcefully, but gently, like tending a flame, not obsessively, but attentively. Freedom fades when attention drifts, and attention returns when you choose stillness over noise, honesty over performance, presence over distraction. None of this requires withdrawal from life. It requires engagement with life, consciously. You do not need to renounce ambition. You need to understand it. You do not need to reject success. You need to redefine it. You do not need to escape society. You need to stop being unconsciously shaped by it. A conscious life is deeply practical. It shows up in how you speak, in how you listen, in how you respond to conflict, in how you treat your own mind, and perhaps most importantly, it shows up in how you relate to uncertainty. An unconscious mind fears uncertainty. It clings to plans, identities, and guarantees. A conscious mind respects uncertainty. It knows that life is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be lived. This understanding softens anxiety. You stop demanding certainty before action. You stop postponing life until conditions are perfect. You act from clarity, not from prediction, and clarity is always available, here and now, not in the future, not after achievement, not after approval. Here, now, this moment, if you are present enough to meet it. And this brings us to the final truth, the one that does not age, does not fade, does not depend on belief. The quality of your life is not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by how consciously you meet what happens. Pain will come, loss will come, change will come. But suffering, unnecessary suffering, arises from unconsciousness. A conscious person still feels pain, but does not add confusion. They experience loss but do not lose themselves. They face change but do not resist reality. This is inner freedom, not invulnerability but resilience, not control but understanding, not escape but presence. So as you move forward, do not ask how to become extraordinary. Ask how to become aware. Do not chase transformation. Allow observation. Do not seek answers. Cultivate attention. And remember, awakening is not becoming someone new. It is unbecoming what you were never meant to be. This life is not a rehearsal. This moment is not practice. You are here. You are alive. And awareness is available now. Live from that. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. Because a life lived consciously, even briefly, is more meaningful than a lifetime lived asleep. And once you taste that meaning, you will never willingly trade it for comfort again.